Ferrari could have done better in the qualifying session for the Chinese Grand Prix. However, the Italian F1 team chose to tweak the setup and something changed. But this should not necessarily be seen as a mistake. After all, points are awarded in the race. However, it remains to be seen whether a setup aimed at improving race pace by managing degradation will be effective when starting further back in the turbulent wake of other cars that reduce downforce. The telemetry analysis between Lewis Hamilton and Oscar Piastri's best lap times in Q3 at the 5.451-kilometer Shanghai International Circuit tells two very different stories. On one side, the Briton had to manage a car with suboptimal behavior, while on the other, the Australian was able to fully exploit the perfect balance of the MCL-39 to put together a flawless lap. Oscar Piastri gained 0.286 seconds on the seven-time Formula One world champion thanks to a combination of higher cornering speeds in slow turns. Moreover, it comes down to optimal traction management during acceleration phases. McLaren demonstrated excellent aerodynamic efficiency, allowing the Australian driver to be quicker in direction changes and have more grip in high-speed corners. In Turn 1, Lewis Hamilton adopted a very progressive braking technique, never fully releasing the throttle in the initial phase of trail braking. This choice is aimed at keeping the rear stable and avoiding excessive oversteer, but it compromises turn-in, causing an imperfect balance. The consequence? To compensate, Lewis Hamilton is forced to brake longer, losing time compared to Oscar Piastri, who instead benefits from a smoother turn-in and higher minimum speed, already gaining 0.051 seconds with 7 km per hour more. As the lap progresses, the SF-25's imperfect balance continues to penalize Lewis Hamilton. In corners like 8, 9, 12, and 16, the seven-time F1 world champion has to stay on the brakes longer than Oscar Piastri, who can release them earlier and get back on the throttle sooner. As a result, Lewis Hamilton has a lower cornering speed, namely 7 km per hour slower in Turn 9 and 8 km per hour slower in Turn 12. Despite everything, the Briton manages to stay on par with the McLaren drivers' times until the second sector, indicating a still competitive lap. However, in the final two corners, the difference becomes evident. Oscar Piastri is able to put down power earlier, especially in Turn 16, where the MCL-39 can transfer much more lateral grip to the ground and generates 12 km per hour more speed. This translates into a gap of 0.120 seconds in a single corner, highlighting how the British car excels in managing grip in fast corners. The lateral G-force telemetry data confirms this trend. In the quicker turns, particularly 7 and 16, McLaren generates more downforce, ensuring a more stable and faster racing, demonstrating the excellent work done by the Woking team. After yesterday's difficulties, Charles Leclerc showed signs of improvement in the F1 sprint qualifying, especially in the first sector, though not enough to surpass his Maranello teammate. The final gap is about a tenth, with the SF-25 continuing to display somewhat unstable behavior, compromising corner exits and traction phases. The Ferrari drivers adopt fairly similar braking strategies. They do this by keeping the throttle slightly open on turn-in to avoid excessive weight transfer. However, while Lewis Hamilton opts for a progressive release, Charles Leclerc prefers a more intermittent braking technique, tapping the pedal to correct the balance. This helps him direct the front end, but is not enough to eliminate imperfect rotation. As a result, at corner exit, the Monegasque finds himself with more steering angle than his teammate, delaying his return to the throttle. In corners like 6, 9, and 12, this puts him at a disadvantage. The Briton can apply power with the wheels straighter, maximizing traction, while Charles Leclerc has to wait several crucial fractions of a second, accumulating a significant gap over the lap. In Turn 12, Lewis Hamilton applies a slight brake input to adjust his line and in turn get back to full throttle earlier. Conversely, his younger teammate is forced to wait a little longer. In the second sector alone, based on the data, the former Alfa Romeo driver lost 0.180 seconds. Despite these difficulties, the Ferrari driver has an advantage in some high-speed corners. In Turn 7, he manages to keep the throttle fully open with his SF-25 car, while Lewis Hamilton is forced to lift slightly by 15%, likely due to suboptimal tire temperatures or a softer setup. The same behavior repeats in Turn 16, where Charles Leclerc carries 11 km per hour more speed, gaining about 0.107 seconds. However, this move is not enough to compensate for the time lost in slow corners. Ferrari has therefore been struggling more than yesterday. Perhaps the F1 rule change on pressures imposed by Pirelli and the higher track temperature are reducing the red car's performance. The same goes for the setup changes made for the race. Throughout qualifying, the Maranello cars suffered in the first 3 corners. Both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton had to control the steering angle to avoid oversteer, struggling to hit the apex. Additionally, the Ferrari drivers did not immediately adapt to the new setup, maximizing performance only after Q2. As expected, McLaren exploited the full potential of the car, which had been untapped yesterday. The reigning world champion team has the best car in Sector 1, with Piastri proving more skilled than his teammate in finding the limit. The Australian managed the tires well. He made better use of the grip in the final corners of the track, where he set the best references. In contrast, Lando Norris made the same mistake as yesterday, braking too late at turn 14. Russell also delivered an excellent performance, securing the front row for Mercedes. The Briton continuously varied his tire warming approach across different runs, finding the ideal window only in Q3. The driver from the Brackley-based team took advantage of the rear camber adjustment compared to the F1 sprint, which made the Silver Arrows competitive in the fast section. In the slower parts, McLaren's drivers stood out, benefiting from a softer setup than yesterday. Norris and Piastri were the best in mid-corner, frequently braking earlier to set up a good exit. Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc, on the other hand, suffered from understeer on entry, carrying less speed to the apex. As Hamilton stated, the team made rear-end adjustments, finding benefits in medium-speed sections. In fact, at turn 1 and through the entire section leading to turn 3, where drivers enter with slight braking before letting the car roll, Lewis set the best reference. However, only in Q3, despite dealing with some oversteer, the British driver managed the rear end better, improving his performance. Throughout qualifying, the F1 champion demanded too large a slip angle from the tires, which led to oversteer. Ferrari deemed the initial snail section crucial, where its drivers overused the tires, sacrificing some performance for the rest of the lap. To improve traction on exit, Ferrari's drivers adopted an overly conservative approach to braking at turn 14, losing about 0.15 seconds to Piastri. However, this choice did not pay off, as, just like yesterday, the tires were not in optimal condition. It is a situation from which the Maranello team can undoubtedly learn. McLaren, on the other hand, benefited from setup changes in slow sections like turn 14, though its average speed in the initial S1 corners was lower. This is because the MCL39 suffers less understeer than its rivals, covering fewer meters. As a result, despite having an average speed 4 km per hour lower than Lewis Hamilton's, it still sets a better time in T1. In terms of traction, Piastri and Verstappen demonstrate a very well-balanced rear end, allowing them to efficiently deploy all the power from the power unit when exiting turn 3. The Australian takes advantage of the smooth torque delivery to reduce the electric component's boost on the short straight leading to turn 6, which, as we will see, enhances performance on the main straight of the Asian F1 circuit. Ferrari, however, continues to struggle with throttle application on exit. This issue could stem from suboptimal tire temperatures, or be a strategic choice for tomorrow, considering the setup adjustment aimed at a more conservative tire approach for the long run. This move might have made the car less responsive over a single lap, but more competitive in race pace. Analyzing the top speeds compared to yesterday, we can get an idea of the aerodynamic changes made after the sprint race. Russell and Verstappen maintain their top speeds, while McLaren has adjusted its power deployment, coming closer to the best in terms of peak velocity. However, the two MCL39 cars still lack efficiency on the long straight leading to turn 14. In this section, they lose over 5 km per hour compared to Verstappen. Ferrari has also opted for a different hybrid deployment strategy compared to yesterday's sprint qualifying, aiming to compensate for traction weaknesses by prioritizing power use on corner exits. This is evident in the section leading to turn 6. As a result, its top speed before turn 14 is lower, though overall aerodynamic load appears similar.